Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for my final thoughts on Dreadnoughts, Fortresses of Steel. Now yes, the irony is not lost on me that I'm doing final thoughts on a game that is still in development, but it's just the pattern I fell into when I started this channel, and I'm a creature of habit, so there's going to be a final thoughts even though this game hasn't quite come into commercial production. But anyway, I'm going to just come straight out and say that I really like this game. I've not been playing it all that long, really, but it has made an impression, and I think it's a fun, engaging, excellent model of naval combat around the turn of the century. And I think the designers have actually got, Rolf and Nick, they actually have a lot to be proud of because they've put together a system which at its heart is really quite simple. Um, as I said in the previous videos, the complexity comes when you start to branch out into its various subsystems. And depending on how much complexity you want to go for in the optional rules, whether you want to, set up different weather conditions that may be more challenging, do you want to fight at night? There are certain tactical options that are there if you want to use them. This game even covers ramming in its rules. If you want to close all the way to point blank range and do that, you can do that. But if you want to start off a bit lighter than that and gradually work up towards it, putting yourself through a programmed learning experience, you can do that too. The first time I ever played this game, I actually contented myself with starting off by just sitting at fairly long range and plinking away, trying to get those all-important straddles with my main armament because I wanted to wrap my head around how that worked before I started bothering the secondary guns. Now, not a very efficient way of fighting a naval battle, but that just worked for me. But the great thing about this game is that it actually supports that kind of play very well. One of the things that I think is really great about Dreadnoughts is that you can do anything you want, from a quick pick-up battle between two ships, as I did in the demonstration video, or you can go all the way up to a squadron-sized engagement that will take you a bit longer to play, but is still pretty good for a game of this scope. There's a section in the rules covering team play if you want to go down that route. That can be a lot of fun, I think, because after a while, if you have too many ships controlled by a single person, you're perhaps getting into the realms of micromanagement. I think previously I mentioned up to 5 or 6, and maybe that's probably most people's limit in terms of the number of ships you want personal control over. But otherwise, it is an easy system, and when you get used to it, you can easily do that. One of the things that I did think was a bit odd at first was the very generous hand sizes, because, with a force as I did in my demonstration video, one ship aside, with the right officers and the presence of a formation card, gives you 6 cards, which is not bad. So you can imagine that if you have another 3 ships in the formation, your hand size increases correspondingly. And the first time I ever sat down to play this game, I actually did one of the hypothetical scenarios where a US battleship on its way to the theatre of war for the Spanish-American War is ambushed by 3 detached Spanish armoured cruisers. Now that is a fun scenario, not just because it's a great way of learning how the game works with fairly basic ships, but also because it's got this wonderful asymmetric flavour to it. The Spaniards are, at a terrible disadvantage individually, but with the numbers, you've got manoeuvring options, and there are ways you can hurt the US behemoth. But anyway, I don't want to lose my point by getting sidetracked. Yes, you can do a lot with this game. You can play any size you want. You can play historical scenarios, you can play a hypothetical scenario, you could do something completely random. That is a great amount of flexibility already, and I think that will definitely broaden this game's appeal. I mean, I certainly enjoy everything from historical scenarios all the way down to single ship actions. Now, in terms of a big scenario, I haven't yet tried it, but the designers have very kindly sent me the ship stats for the Battle of Ulsan, which was fought on August 14th, 1904. So I have all the Japanese and Russian cruisers. I just need to clip them out and actually get them on my gaming table. But big actions actually do work quite well in this game. The formation cards are actually fairly critical in this respect because when you have all your ships organized in a formation, maneuvering suddenly becomes much more straightforward. And I think that was an essential part of the design because it struck me that this is a game that copes very well, thanks to the relative range tokens, with formations fragmenting during a battle. But there are rules that allow you to reform if you don't mind sinking a couple of turns into sorting your line out, which commanders would have done historically, because the last thing you would want if you were an admiral at the time is a melee. You want to retain some kind of control over your force. And when you look at what happened to the Chinese at the Battle of the Yalu, things weren't too bad at the beginning for them, really, but it's when they lose their command control and their cohesion that's a major part in things going wrong for them. And I bet you this game would model that very, very well. Which leads me on to the other thing. I waved the ship cards that I'd been given around a second ago. They've also very generously made available to me an awful lot of the Spanish-American warships, including all the participants at the Battle of Santiago Bay. A huge amount of work has been put into modelling as many ships as they can from this period. And for a person who may not necessarily want to play the game but is interested in the ships of this period, you actually have what amounts to a fairly marvelous visual reference work of relative capabilities. Because when you look close up at some of the data cards, they're not just given as ratings of strength for the game system. You actually have the armament listed. And it's a bit faint in my printout, but you've got very basic data, length, tonnage, and so forth beneath the national flag. So there's quite a bit for the ship spotter and the history buff in there, which I'm glad to say I am in that crowd. As for the way the cards interact with each other, I'd mentioned big hand sizes earlier. I think that's actually a great idea. Some may find that overwhelming, and I did in my very first big game, which was the Spanish armored cruiser Ambush. But then I realized that one of the great things about the big hand size is it gives you so much choice. It actually reduces the restrictions. So I have made the observation before that attack sub was clearly one of the inspirations for this game. And a very valid criticism that's been levelled at attack sub is that when you've got situations where one side only has a small hand, because in attack sub, if you control a single submarine, you've basically got 4 cards, the 3 you generate yourself and 1 for the sub. And between that and the somewhat more limited options, understandably, because sub options are a bit more limited, there's often a sense that attack sub plays you as much as you're playing attack sub. This is not at all the case with Dreadnoughts. With Dreadnoughts, if you've got a fairly sizable force, and by sizable I mean 2 ships aside is plenty, you have enough cards in hand to make it more than likely on most turns that you will have a decent amount of choice as to what action you perform. Yes, there are certain restrictions. Certain types of fire are not an option under certain weather conditions, as I discovered with the fog card that rotted things up a bit in the demonstration. But then there are other mechanisms that offset this. So I really love the mechanic that permits the secondary armament and the torpedo armament to fire without the play of a shooting card. This actually models really well the difference between the primary armament of many of the capital ships in this period, which had to be laboriously brought onto target at longer ranges. Anyone who was there at the Battle of the Yellow Sea would probably agree with that. But then, of course, when you bring your heavy armament to point blank range, straddle doesn't matter at that point. You can freely play those salvo cards. In terms of the gunnery, I think everything possible has been thought of. Maneuvering, I've already touched on. I think the maneuvering system works really, really well. I like the way it accounts for the state of your formation, the options it gives an enemy to react, the importance of speed. This is the other thing. And I like the way that the optional rules with the scenarios cover a lot of the historical realities. So, as presented, all these ships in the game have been modelled with their best face on, if I can call it that, as they were designed, as God intended. But there are optional rules in the historical scenarios that allow you to hobble them if you want to recreate the conditions under which their crews historically fought. So I'd mentioned in the demonstration that Knyaz Suvarov suffers an armour and protection penalty because of the disadvantages of loading, particularly her coal, that she was labouring under at the Battle of Tsushima. And I'd also highlighted that Mikasa didn't get the same gunnery bonus that the Suvorov did. Rolf has very kindly been in touch to clarify that point because, of course, being based on a slightly older class of British pre-Dreadnought, her guns were not up to par with the Royal Navy's very latest 12-inch mountings, which probably would have been on a par with the Suvorov. So the Japanese very much make up for it with the skill of their crews. So there's that side of things. One thing I didn't mention in my overview of the components, I talked about the rule book and how marvelous it is that you only have to wade through 15 pages of rules for your initial learning session. And then you can go into the more detailed ones and the optional rules after that. I didn't highlight the playbook, which is really, really, really useful because it contains this incredibly detailed example of play showing a hypothetical action between a British and a Russian armoured cruiser. It's basically Rurik versus Imperuse. And that is a beautiful way to get someone into the game. Classic mechanism for teaching, but it's very well put together. And then there's the scenarios. They're divided into two sections. There's generic scenarios, chance encounters, or one fleet is trying to get past a blockade, or you're on a shore bombardment mission and you're interrupted, or even a full fleet engagement if you want to do that. And these are the generic scenarios, but there's brilliant instructions for players to just put together whatever they want. And then if you don't want to be too imaginative, you just want to be told what's what, or you want to play something specific, then brilliant. Here are the historical scenarios. And they too are a mix of the real life and the hypothetical. So the very first one that's listed is the Battle of Flamborough Head in 1887, which of course never happened in real life, but had us and the French got a tiny bit more antsy with each other, it may have happened. And then you've got the Battle of Santiago Bay, Ulsan. I really like these because even the hypothetical ones, you're given a bit of background just to situate the action and give it some context. And you're given very clear instructions about dispositions of both sides, what your victory conditions are. It's really, really good. And there is so much to choose from. And of course, campaign rules. If you want to, you can play through an entire war, a hypothetical or a real one. And you've got these great campaign log sheets. So this is a game that I would say is component light in terms of the variety of what you get. I mean, hopefully, if this game ever comes into print, I would hope to see it because I know the work has been put in absolutely full to the brim with ship cards. Even if most of those come out as future expansions, there's nothing quite like a massive stack of cardboard representing your fleet. Um, but besides the ship's cards, you basically have the action card deck, which even, okay, allowing for the fact that I printed mine on paper, is still only about that thick. So not a massive set of cards. You've got your components, your markers, your admiral counters, your various status things, and a couple of cheat sheets. So it's a very portable game, and I like that because I'm one of those people who often takes card games with me places. And in fact, this game already travels with me on some occasions. If I've got those extra long commutes or work journeys, I will just take this couple of ship data cards and a small box full of the cards with the counters I made. Easily done, easily done. And you can fairly simply play a small scenario within a fairly tiny table space. Naturally, if you want to do a squadron on squadron, I mean, something like the Battle of Ulsan will take a greater amount of space. But I think to some, because I'm probably meandering a bit in my enthusiasm, I think that there is a wonderful game system in here. I think it's been very well thought out. Um, there are bits and pieces here and there which probably could do with tightening up, but then again, it's still a work in progress. And but it's one that's very close. I think I feel that this game, in its present state, pretty much covers most things, and it would only be those very odd anomalies that playtesting would bring out. So far, all the scenarios I've played have been from the 1890s, early 1900s, and I'm quite keen, maybe in the near future, to try out some of the hypothetical battles from the 1880s, because you get this strange coexistence between ships like Central Battery Ironclad suddenly bumping up against the upper end of turret ships. But that's something for the future. As I say, I think Rolf and Nick have much to be proud of in their achievements so far. It is an excellent game. It's in its basics, it's easy to learn. It's very engaging and very immersive. You can often spot when I'm getting immersed in a game because that's when I start forgetting rules because I'm just going so, ooh. But yes, this game is marvelous. I enjoy it tremendously, and I think I will always enjoy it because there's a pantheon of card games, war games that are card driven that I really respect. And Attack Sub and Upfront are in that pantheon, and Dreadnoughts is now in there too. I just want to say a quick word about complexity before I wrap this up. I've said the game is very easy to learn, but of course it's difficult to compare because it's not on the market yet. So it's definitely not as difficult as Upfront in terms of picking up the entire game and cramming all the rules into your head. To pick a more contemporary example to us, it's nowhere near as complex as GMT's popular Fields of Fire series. It is definitely denser than games like Attack Sub, but then Attack Sub takes that system and really had it down to brass tacks, I think, which is both a good and a bad thing, more for the good. Dreadnought sits comfortably in the middle between those games I've just cited, and I think that it'll certainly have very broad appeal for wargamers, and I think it will have a lot of appeal for people who are interested in naval combat around the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. Now, normally at this stage, I would launch into my usual enthusiastic, do try this game. I don't think you'll regret it. But of course, sadly, you guys probably don't have that option just yet. So I have my fingers firmly crossed that this game will be in production soon, that someone will pick it up. And hopefully it will be something that more of us will be able to discuss when it is properly out there. But I just want to close by wishing Rolf and Nick the very best of luck with this project, and to thank you both again for allowing me to play test your game and to share it with people on the channel. I'm very grateful for that. And yes, I just want to wish you guys all the very best with it. Good luck. Um, and to all of you who've been watching this series, a very big thank you. I always appreciate your company. Thanks so much for the comments and observations. It's always great to have those. I love the conversations and the exchanges. That's really brilliant. So, to all my incredibly patient veterans who are still with me, a massive hello and a thank you. And to anyone who's visiting my channel for the first time, if this happens to be your first video, welcome. There's wargaming of all sorts here now, and I realize somehow in the last few days I've managed to cross my 200th video, so I must be doing something right if you guys are still coming back and joining. But really, thank you all so much. It's a real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video, whatever that one might happen to be. Thanks very much. Bye.